Good Tov, everybody. This week we have basically two readings that we're going to be dealing with. One is the regular Parshat Hashavua of Parshat Kitisa, and it's also one of the Dalet Parshiot. We're reading Parshat Para, and hopefully I will try, if possible, to see if there is a connection between these two Parshiot and what is exactly that connection. And why exactly do we read Parshat Para before Pesach? Why is it so critical that that lesson should be taught? All right, so we're going to first focus on one very, very small aspect of the Chet HaEgel story. There's so much we could say about it. So from a time perspective, I just want to look at one issue. And that is basically the reaction of Moshe Rabbeinu when he first hears from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the Jews have sinned and made a Chet HaEgel. So we're going to start in the middle of the story. It's in this week's Parsha, Perek Lamed Beis, starting with Pasuk Zion. It says as follows: Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lech reid kishiches amcha asher ha'lisa me'eretz Mitzrayim. And God said to Moshe, "Go down." Moshe was on top of the mountain. Go down, not only to go down the mountain, but basically go down from where you are. Here, the irony is that at the same time that the Jews are at the lowest level they've been in a while, Moshe is the highest level that any human being could possibly reach. He's basically learning Torah, come out up in Shemayim. Go down, kishiches amcha, because your people have corrupted themselves. Asher ha'aleisa me'eretz Mitzrayim, that you took out of Egypt. So, first of all, number one is there's something fishy here. What do you mean, your people? It's almost like, whenever my children do something brilliant, then obviously they're my children. And if they don't do something brilliant, then they're my wife's children. Is that what's going on here? What do you mean, shiches amcha? We're God's people. And did Moshe take him out of Egypt? God took him out of Egypt. So what's it talking about? Also, if God's angry here, I understand the expression Vaydaber is a lashon of being angry. But then it says Vaydaber Hashem. God is speaking b'yud kei vav kei b'midas harachmim. Doesn't sound really to be midas harachmim. Because what does God say? Next pasuk. So maher min haderech asher zivisim. They've turned away quickly from the derech. They're off the derech that I commanded them. Asu lahem egel masecha. And they made for themselves a molten calf. We're going to assume that at this point that's one avera. What does it mean that they went off the derech? They are involved in avodah zarah. Vayishtachvu v'yizbechu lo, and they bow down to this golden calf, and they're offering sacrifices to it. Vayomru, and they're saying, Eila Elokecha Yisrael asher ha'elucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. These are your gods, Israel, that took you out of Egypt. Now, first of all, it's Elokecha is plural. What do you mean gods? That's number one. And who are they speaking of? It said, and they said, these are your gods, Israel. Well, aren't they Israel? Who's actually doing the talking here? So Rashi actually on this point says that what does it mean, shiches amcha? The amcha literally means your people, Moshe Rabbeinu. That the people that sinned was the Erev Rav. And what does it mean that you took them out of Egypt? When they were leaving Egypt, there were a number of Egyptians that decided, hey, we want to join along. We've been impressed with what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done here. And we want to, and we're guilty of the way we treated the Jewish people to the last 100 years. We want to come join you. And instead of consulting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as to whether they should accept them or not, Moshe felt, of course, we're in the business of spreading monotheism to the whole world. Come and join us. You took them out. They are the ones who are actually doing the sinning with the Chet HaEgel. And then pasuk tins of Yomer Hashem al Moshe, and here it's Vayomer, not Vayidaber. Not only is it Hashem speaking again, but it is the language is toned down a little bit because Moshe doesn't respond to what God says. He puts the blame. It's your fault, Moshe. Moshe speechless. Says, I've seen these people, and they are a stick-necked people. Here, I think he's not talking about the Erev Rav anymore. He's talking about Bnei Yisrael. Leave me alone, stop bothering me, which of course Moshe hasn't said a word yet. So it's kind of strange to say, stop it, stop pressing me. Well, I'm not doing anything. I guess it's a hint that you should start saying something so that I should get my anger out against them and I will destroy them. And I am going to create from you a new people. And it's at this point that Moshe finally responds to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to say. Now, again, first of all, it seems clearly here from the Psukim that the Erev Rav were the ones who were actually doing the worshiping, and Bnei Yisrael were more passive here. So again, you could be disappointed that no one from Bnei Yisrael had the chutzpah to get up and stand up against them and to try to protest what was going on, but to deserve destruction and I'm going to wipe them all out and start over from you. That seems perhaps to be a little bit harsh, especially if it's coming from Yud Kei Vav Kei, from the attribute of mercy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, but Moshe starts praying. Vayichal Moshe, an interesting expression, Vayichal, he was praying, it was like he got sick from his praying. That's how hard he was praying on behalf of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we're not going to go through all the arguments that Moshe Rabbeinu gives God as to why he should not really carry out his plan. But if you look at the end of Pasuk Dalet, what's the conclusion of Moshe's tefillah? So God is going to have a change of heart and maybe reconsider that maybe it was a little bit harsh the way he reacted in the first place. Again, we're not going to, does God change his mind, how our tefillah works? We're not going to get into that now. So this is the reaction of Moshe Rabbeinu. He is the defense attorney for Klal Yisrael. He puts things into perspective. The Jews, okay, now what do you want from them? They just came out of Egypt. Okay, maybe I should have taken out the Erev Rav, and maybe the Jews should have stood up. Does it warrant, the negative PR you're going to get and all the other issues that Moshe brings up? God says, okay, a stay of execution. We'll see. I'll reconsider. And then Moshe Rabbeinu comes back. Moshe comes down. We're gonna skip a little bit. Perek Lamed Beis Pasuk Yud Tes. What does it say? Vahi ka'asher karav el hamachaneh. And it was when Moshe draws near to the camp. Vayar et ha'egel u'mecholot. He saw the calf and the dances that were going on. Vayichar af Moshe. And now Moshe is really angry. V'yashlech miyadav et haluchot. And he threw from his hand the tablets. V'yashaber otam tachat tahar. And he broke them underneath the mountain. Now again, we're not going to get involved in the question right, wrong. And if he was going to break them, why did he take them back in the first place? He breaks the luchos. Okay. V'kachas ha'egel asher asu. He took the egel that they had made. V'yisrov pa'esh, and he burned it in fire. V'yitchan asher dak, and whatever didn't burn, he ground up until it was fine flour. V'yazer al pnei hamayim, and he spread it on the face of the water. V'yasht et bnei Yisrael, and he caused bnei Yisrael to drink this water. So what does it mean? Rashi, what do you mean? If you think about, there's a symbolism here, which Rashi immediately picks up on. Vayashkes bnei Yisrael. Niskavein lebodkam kasotos. So he wanted to judge them like a sota. A sota is a woman who is feared to be unfaithful to her husband, and she has to drink a certain amount of water. And if she was faithful, the water will not cause any damage to her. But if chas v'shalom she was unfaithful, then she will be killed by drinking the water. So basically, what he wanted was to do a mass sota examination, a rapid sota test, to see that anybody who was unfaithful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu would die. In fact, Rashi continues, Shalosh misos nidunu sham. There were 3 ways of death that were proclaimed at this point in time. Im yesh edim b'hasra, if there were witnesses who gave warning, meaning that there were Jews who were there and maybe they didn't stop anything, but they did warn the person that what you're about to do is avodah zarah. What you're about to do, it might be chayav misa, and you warn them and you witness what they were doing. Then later on, we'll see that these people would actually be killed by one of the Daled Misas Bezdin, beside with the sword. Why the sword? Why is that again? Because that is what happens when you have a majority of people in an Ir Hanidachat, when they are determined to have worshipped, the majority of the city worshipped Avodah Zarah. That's the punishment that they get. Eidim below Hasra. What happens if there are people who witnessed what went on but never actually gave a warning? Then b'magefa, they were killed by God in a plague. Shnema v'yivgof Hashem esa'am, and later on in the story we'll say that God actually caused a plague to break out, and there are people that died because of this plague. Lo edim below asra. What happens if there is no edim and no asra? Behadro ken, right? Shabbat kamamayim b'tzavu bitnehem, and this is where that's what the water took care of. Those people who had no edim and no asra, they died from the test of drinking the water. So what it seems is really kind of strange here. Moshe pleased with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, you have to be understanding. Your decree is very, very harsh. They don't deserve Misa, And Moshe finally convinced him. He wins the case. And then what does it sound like? Yeah, it's like a lot of times, when your kids get into trouble, you're in the principal, you defend them. And then when you come home, you basically, scream and yell at them for being responsible for what went on. So Moshe is saying, God, I don't want you to kill him. I'm going to kill them. And that's exactly what happened. So what happened? Where is this transition? What caused this transition where Moshe is their biggest defense attorney and all of a sudden he's their biggest prosecutor? What went on? So there's one pasuk. I think that's the key. And it's a pasuk that we read. When Moshe comes down, what does it say? What does it say that he sees? Right? This is Perek Lamed Beis pasuk Yates. Vayar es ha'egel u'mechalot. It didn't just say that he saw the egel. The Chumash adds on an extra word. He saw the dancing. Right? What do you mean he saw the dancing? So why does the dancing make a difference? So if you turn to Perek Lamed Beis, go back a little bit, Pasuk Vav, there's a Rashi there, where it says, Vayeshkimu b'macharat, right? This is the day, again, they built the Egel, and Aaron was trying to buy some time. He says, Chag Lashem Machar. Okay, we had a big day. Let's prepare properly for how we're going to serve this idol. Tomorrow morning, there's a holiday. So what happens? They got up vatikin. They were really anxious. They didn't wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning like you would do on a normal holiday. They got up early. And they started off well. They offered karbanot. Now, whether these karbanot were to the ego, whether the ego represented something else, again, we're not going to deal with that issue. What exactly was the problem with the chet ego? But they offer karbanot, and let's assume that these karbanot were for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They weren't really worshiping Avodah Zarah. And then it says, what did they do? They didn't just, daven. Vayeshev ha'am lechol v'shaso. They sat down to eat and drink. Vayakumu l'sachek. And they got up to make merry. What does that mean? So Rashi says, here, this is Rashi in Pasuk, the end of Pasuk Vav. Where is this? That here, V'yikumu l'sachek, we've had that expression before. And basically, okay, it says, V'yimizbech l'chosam, Aaron sees what's going on, and he builds a mizbeach. V'yomer chag l'Hashem machar, right, not today. Again, he wants to push them off. And then he says, V'dvarim harbe ra Aaron. Ra chur ben achoso shahaya mochicham b'hargu. The first thing that Aaron sees is that they killed Chur. And because remember, there were two people in charge. When Moshe left, he says, if you have a problem, two people that handle these issues are Aaron and Hur. We don't hear from Hur again. This is the last time we hear from Hur in the entire Torah. Even though he's prominent in the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, he was involved with the war with Amalek. He's involved here. Never hear from him again. Says Chazal, he was killed because he tried to stop the people from sinning. V'zel vayiven mizbeach lefanav. What does it mean? He built a mizbeach in front of vayiven mizavuach lefanav. He built a mizbeach from the one who was killed in front of him. And it goes on to say this is one of the reasons why Aaron was willing to get involved. He didn't want them to then be responsible for killing him as well. That would really be terrible for Klal Yisrael. Okay, and again he delayed. And it says vayishkimu. They got up early the next morning. Rashi says, litzachek. What does it mean, litzachek? Yesh b'mashma zeh giloy arayos, right? Ushvichas damim v'avodah zarah. The word litzachek, right? And we've seen this before. It's used. It's not the first time Rashi quotes this. Means that first of all there was murder. There was shvichas damim. That's what we just read in the previous Rashi that they killed Hur. There was Gilead Arayos. They were, I don't know what in the world they were doing, but they were having relations that, that they shouldn't be having. And there was Avodah Zarah. That's where L'Sachek. So what happens here, when God said, Sur Maher Medaderach Asher Sivisim Basul Hamse Ego Masecha, it's not one sentence or one problem. It's two separate independent issues. The first issue that God says, Surah Maher Menaderech, they're off the derech. They're running wild. They are acting meshuga, right? Murder. And it's something which isn't even openly mentioned in the story. Maybe it was too horrible to even mention with, to put this on the Klal Yisrael. And Gilead Arayos and the three cardinal sins they're doing here. And then it's only the last where it says, after Surah Maher Menaderech, then it says, then that's mentioned separately. But this is what Moshe sees. It's not only they made an egel, but it's their wild behavior. It's the dancing and the drinking and the merrymaking. I don't know. It's like someone who's seeing a Purim Suda. This is what really disgusts Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? And what does it change? Soloveitchik once said, and not necessarily in explaining this problem, he was using this point for another problem that he had, is that he once described that Avodah Zarah is basically a two-step process. Number one, Avodah Zarah, the first part of Avodah Zarah is the technical worship of the idol. That's the first stage of Avodah Zarah. And there are laws in how you worship a particular idol, and you go ahead and you bow down to the idol and worship the idol. That's stage number one. But then there's a second stage. The Rav used the word called paganism. It's the culture and the lifestyle that the Avodah Zarah creates within the individual. And basically, what Avodah Zarah encouraged was the idea that there is not one God. There are physical forces in the world. And we are a material girls and boys. We are physical people. But there's no morals and ethics. There's no one creator in the world. We are here no different than the animal world, and our job is to try and avail ourselves of whatever physical pleasures we can, whether it be eating, drinking, relationship issues, whatever it may be. That's what life is all about. To eat and drink and be merry, and without feeling any guilt whatsoever for whatever that you do. And that's it. And that's the lifestyle that Avodah Zarah could lead to. Now, paganism could be separate. There are people who may not actually worship idols, but live a paganistic type of lifestyle. One is not dependent on the other. And what the Torah is telling to us here, and this is that the Torah hates paganism, the lifestyle, even more perhaps than the technical avoda of Avodah Zarah. And when Moshe came down from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why was he so upset? Because according to his first understanding from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Jews have a problem. Of course, they have a problem. I've been gone for a long time. They're worried. So I'll come, but I'll deal with it. I'll come and I'll deal with it. I'll come back. They made a man-made, off the cuff representative of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, this golden idol. I'm coming back with luchot that are hand carved from my Kodesh Baruch Hu. That there is miracles within the luchos. Once they see me, and they'll be a little bit more at ease, and they'll see the luchot, and they'll compare it to what they've done. Immediately, everybody's going to do tshuva. They're going to cry. They're going to tear kriya. They're going to apologize, and I'll come and I'll give them shirim, and they'll be so impressed, and everything will be fine. But when he comes back, maybe a couple people, respond to, but there's no indication within the text that things stopped. The kiddush continued, the drinking continued, the partying continued. They were so far gone that they hardly took any notice to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's when Moshe first realized that he has a much more serious problem than he originally thought. It's not just a theological issue, and he'll come with the luchos and sit down and give them a good cheer, and everything will be fine. They'll go back. We'll be able to continue where we left off. It's a much more basic problem that they longed for the lifestyle that the Egyptians had, and not for the lifestyle the Torah represents. That's a much more serious problem. That's what required a much more serious response. And that explains the transition between Moshe, the defense attorney of Klal Yisrael, and Moshe, the prosecutor. Okay, point number one. Point number two, we also read not only Parshat Kitisa, we're reading this week the Parshat Parah. Parshat Parah begins in the beginning of Parshat Chukas in Bamidbar, Perek Yud Tes, Pasuk Aleph. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe v'Aaron lemor. Zot chukat Torah. This is the chok. These are the statutes of the Torah. Shetziva Hashem lemor daber al bnei Yisrael b'kui lecha parah aduma tmima asher ein ba mum asher lo aola aleha ol. And here we are bringing into this the story. The parah aduma is chukas HaTorah. It's the chok of the Torah. So first of all, what does it mean, the chok of the Torah? It should basically say it's zos chukas haparah, that the parsha we're about to read is a chok, and it's the chok of paraduma. What does it mean? It's the chok of the entire Torah. What does that mean? So it could mean it's the first chok mentioned in the Torah, it could be the most difficult, but what does it mean? So Rashi says, zo chukat Torah, Lefi shahasatan v'umos ha'olam monin et Yisrael lomar ma hamitzvah hazot u'ma tam yeshla. The nations of the world mock us. You're keeping a mitzvah like Parah Aduma? What's the logic of that mitzvah? Lefikach kasa bachuka gezerah hi milfanai ein lecha reshus laharher achareha. Okay, so basically, what Rashi is saying here is that Parah Aduma is a mitzvah that has no logic. Ad kadei kach, that the nations look at us as if we're narrow-minded Jews who do things that are totally, illogical and totally insane. And simply because we think Kodesh Baruch Hu commanded it. You're a human being. You have a brain. You're supposed to think out, does it make sense to you or not? If it makes sense, you do it. If it doesn't make sense, you don't do it. And Rashi, in fact, goes on and says that, no, there's no logic to this mitzvah. And we'll see there's a lot of difficult things in this Mishnah, in this halacha. And there's no logic. However, Rashi basically continues in this thing throughout the whole beginning of the Parsha, until he gets to Pasuk Chav, right? Explaining, makes all points and the halachas of it, and the people who become Torah because of it, people who deal with it become Tameh, all the problems that don't make any sense in expanding on why it doesn't make any sense. However, when he gets to the end of Pasuk Chav, Rashi says, again, if you look, it's listed in the middle of Parshas Chafez, right before it says V'yikhu Divrei Mascha V'yikhu Lecha. Rashi goes back to the beginning of the parak, and it starts explaining the parak not Lefi Pshat, but Lefi Darash. And this is where Rashi says, Zeu Perusha. This is Pshat. Lefi Mashma'a V'Hilchoteh, based on the simple reading of the text and the halachos that surround the Parah Aduma. Umedrash Agada Hetakti Misodo Sherabi Moshe Hadarshan. And now he's going to bring you the Medrash, right, that he found in Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan. Vizel, V'yikhu Elecha. What does it mean, take for yourself a Parah Aduma? Mishalahem. They have this money, they have to buy, the people have to buy the Parah Aduma. Shehem Shein Parku Nizme Azahav La'egel Mishalahem. Just like the money, the jewelry that was donated to create the Egel Azav was their money. It was private funds, not taken from the tzibur. Kach Yaviu Zu L'Kapar Mishalahem. So too, the Parah Aduma, which is coming to atone for them, the money should come from the people. Parah Aduma. Why a Parah Aduma? Mashal Leven Shifcha. Shetine Paltin. What happens if a maid was working in the palace and she didn't have childcare one day? She brought her children to work, and the kids dirtied up the palace. Amru tavo imo v'tinach hatzoa. So you say to the mother, the king's not going to clean up the dirt. You come and clean up the dirt that your kids made. Kach tavo para v'techaper al ha'egel. Why is Parah Aduma? The Parah Aduma is the mother cow, is the mature adult cow. Let her come to clean up the mess that the calf made. Aduma, why does it have to be totally red? Hashem imiadimu ketola, right? If your sins should be red as crimson. Red is a sign of sin. Shachet karu adam. Tmima has to be totally red. Hashem Yisrael Shahid Tmimim V'nasubo Baalei Mumim. Because the Jews, prior to the Chet HaEgel, they were Tamim. They were perfect. They had returned to a pre-Chet stage of perfection. And then after Chet HaEgel, they became Baalei Mum again. They were blemished. So Tavi Zu V'techaper Alei V'yachzu L'tmumam T'lmimusam. So that the Parah should come and help the Jews return to their pristine state of Tara. There should be no yoke on it. The way the Jews, took off the yoke of heaven. Who do you bring the Parah Aduma to? To the Elazar HaKohen. The same way here, the congregation turned to Aaron to make the Egel. So the Parah Aduma is given to his descendants, right? Okay. Anyway, because Aaron was involved in making the Egel, so he didn't do this original avoda. A prosecutor cannot become a defense attorney. And Rashi goes on, basically, I'm not going to read all the different Rashis, but here Rashi goes on to explain, from Drash, what each detail, why each detail in Parah Aduma. So again, two problems here. Problem number one is that Rashi seems to contradict himself. In the beginning, he says that Parah Aduma is the ultimate chok. There is no reason whatsoever behind it. Ad kadei kach, that the nations of the world don't find any meaning to it and totally mocking us for observing it. And yet, Rashi goes on to quote, I might even read you, to continue in the Rashi, that there's each point is relevant. Why the cow to atone for the Egel, and why it has to be red, and why it has to be tamim, and why does it not have yoke on it, and why the money has to come from Dan. Every single point has a good reason behind it. So Rashi, you're contradicting yourself. You're giving two contradictory explanations. Also, what's strange, however, about it is this thing that always bothered me. is that normally when Rashi gives an option of pshat and drash, he does it pasuk by pasuk. Here is the simple pshat of the pasuk, and here is the medrash. And I felt compelled to give you the medrash. But here, Rashi goes through the entire story. And then, I remember once when I first, as a kid, looking for something that I knew Rashi said regarding Paraduma, and I couldn't find it in the opening psukim. Until finally I realized that I went through every single Rashi, that Rashi goes back to Pasuk Chabeis, goes back to Pasuk Aleph to redo the entire story. Why does Rashi do it that way? That is not normal. And I saw, luckily, that I'm not the only one that came up with this question. I was listening to a shir by Rav Menachem Wiener from Yeshiva Ma'alot, and he deals with this question. And I'm going to just quote some of the things that he says, and then we'll somehow use what he says to answer some of my issues. He says, basically, he started off quoting the Gemara in Kedushin. The Gemara in Kedushin, on Daf, Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph, tells us the story, Boy Minei Meirav Ula. Ad Heichad Kibbud Av Ein. The Gemara there is discussing the mitzvah of Kibbud Ein. How far does one have to go, for the mitzvah of Kibbud Ein? Amar Lahem. So Ula said to them, go see a case of a non-Jew in Ashkelon. The Dama ben Nesina Shemo, his name is Dama ben Nesina. Pamachas bitchu chachamim pragmatia b'shishim ribo sochar. Jews offered him a business deal. Again, the Gemara we're not going to read. The story is mentioned in two different versions in the Gemara Kedushin. What was this business deal? In the second version, it mentions that there was a gemstone from the ephod that was missing from the Tumim, and they wanted to replace it. And he had one. And in fact, Yerushalmi mentions which particular stone it was, but we're not going to get into that. Now, anyway, they offered him a tremendous amount of money to buy the stone. He had the stone, but it was locked up in a safe. And the key to the safe was under the pillow where his father was sleeping. And he wouldn't wake up his father. Now, I don't know if the Gemara doesn't tell us that they waited. It seems that they were in a rush. I don't know if he got the money for this. And the sale didn't go through. He wasn't willing to wake up his father. That was the extent of Kibbud Av V'Eim. You have to be willing to lose a tremendous amount of money and for Kibbud Av V'Eim. Right? Again, they quote. I remember I quoted the second story. Which I'm going to skip at this point in time, talking about they wanted the gemstone, okay? But then the Gemara continues. But a year later, God rewarded Dama ben Nesina for his Kibbud Av V'Eim. We know that it's not very easy to get a paraduma. A paraduma was born to the herd of Dama ben Nesina. So the rabbis were interested in getting the paraduma. Amar lahem yodei ani bachem shemani mevakesh mikem kol moment sheba'olam atem notim li. I know that I could basically request a blank check. I could write any amount and you'll give it to me. Ela ein ani mevakesh mikem ela osa maman shivsaditi b'shvil kibbud abba. But the only thing I want is to pay me the amount that you would have paid me for the gemstone that I lost out last year for the kibbud abba I did. That's all I'm going to take for you. And they closed the deal. Okay? And that's the story that the Gemara in Kedushin mentions. Okay? Now, first of all, the question you could ask is why, when the Gemara is looking for an example of Kibbud Av V'Eim, why did they go to the story of Dama ben Nesina from a non-Jew? Weren't there Jews who did great acts of Kibbud Av V'Eim? And there are stories of other Tanoim that basically did tremendous acts. Why go for the story of a non-Jew? Question number one. So Rav Weiner basically went on to explain that if you look back in the Torah, the first negative commandment in the Torah was basically a chok. What was the first negative commandment? The first positive commandment in the Torah is Mikol Eitz Hagan Achol Tocha, that we're allowed to not only eat, we're commanded to eat and partake from every. Adam was commanded to partake of every tree and every fruit and every type of fruit that Kadosh Baruch Hu had created in Gan Eden. But there was one tree that he was not allowed to eat from, and that was the tree of the Eitz Hadas. That was a chok. Wasn't logical. Why? Because why create the tree if you didn't want me to eat from it? And the tree was gorgeous. It had the most, the most beautiful fruit, the greatest aroma. It was like, if it ate Eitz it provided not only physical nourishment but spiritual nourishment. I'll have unbelievable knowledge. Isn't that something that I should want? When Shlomo HaMelech was given, a wish, asked the genie, "What do you want?" You have one wish, and his wish was not for wealth and not for power, but it was for knowledge. Kosh Baruch says, "Oh, that's an amazing request. Because you requested just that, I'll give you it all." So of course, logically, we should want to eat it. Why would God deny that from me? It doesn't make any sense. So that first negative commandment was a chok. And what happened? Adam ate from the tree. And in fact, he says, after he gets confronted by Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he asks, why did we eat from the tree? What does he say? Hanachash yisiani v'ochal. The nachash enticed me. It doesn't say v'achalti, and I ate, past tense, v'ochal. And there's a Medrash Plia that says, what does Adam respond back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? He says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only did I eat, yesterday, I'm going to continue eating today and tomorrow and the next day. That's what the Medrash says. V'ochal, not v'achalti. I ate. No, I ate and I'm going to continue to eat. Are you kidding? I mean, this is the way you respond to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Do you know who you're talking to? So the Medrash basically is assuming that this is not a chutzpah on the part of Adam Harishon, but rather what? That in Adam's understanding, this was a one-time prohibition, meaning you're not supposed to eat from it, and that's it. But once you ate from it, then that's it. It's too late. The mitzvah, the negative commandment, falls by the wayside. And how do we know that? Right? We can maybe back up this with two possibilities. If you look in Bereshis, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Zayin, and we're going to read Rashi as well. It says, "Vatipakachna einei shnehem." After Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, their eyes were opened up. Veidu keirumim heim. They knew that they were naked. Right? What do you mean? What does it mean that they knew that they were naked? I mean, didn't they know they were naked beforehand? I mean, you just look in the mirror, right? You don't even have to look in the mirror. So what does it mean? Rashi asks this question. Afasuma yodea kishahu arum. Even a blind person knows if he's naked. Elamahu v'yedu kirumim heim. What does the pasuk mean that they were naked? Mitzvah achas hoisa biyadam. They had one mitzvah. The truth is, they had two mitzvahs. I'm Russian. They had one negative mitzvah, I guess. Minis artelum emena, and they basically threw it out. What do you mean they threw it out? The mitzvah's still there. It's still with them. It's like we have a commandment not to do malach on Shabbos. If chas v'shalom, a person did malach on one Shabbos, does that mean next Shabbos he can continue doing malach? He doesn't have to forget the whole concept of Shabbos is no longer relevant to him? Of course it is. It's an ongoing lav. Every time you go back and do the lav again, you'll get it. So what do you mean? We had a mitzvah and now it's gone. It's taken away from. It's not taken away from. It's still there. There's still an ongoing prohibition to eat again. Second proof, not from Rashi, but this is in, again, same Perek Gimel, Pasuk Chav Beis in Bereshis, but it says, V'yomer Hashem Elokim, Hein Adam haya kachad mimenu ladas tov v'ra. Man has become like us to know the difference between good and evil. V'yata pen yishlach yadov lakachas gam me'etz hachayim v'chal v'chay le'olam. I can't allow him to continue living in Gan Eden, because what's going to happen? He might go ahead and eat from the Eitz HaChaim. That would give him eternity. I don't want that to happen. I have to make sure that I exile him banish him from Gan Eden, so he doesn't come to eat from the Eitz HaChaim. Well, shouldn't be worried about two things. I'm worried about eating from the Eitz HaChaim, and I'm worried that he'll eat again from the Eitz HaDas. If he ate it once, what's to say he won't do it again? Why isn't God worried about him a repeat performance of eating from the Eitz HaDas? Because it would seem, this may be what the Medrash Leah is suggesting, that Adam felt that the mitzvah is no longer relevant to him, and the only and it's fine. Why is that true? Because it could be. This is what Raviner suggests. This is his point. Because it could be that when God originally told Adam, Mikol eitz hagan achol tachal, that you should eat from all the trees of the garden, he included in that the eitz hadas as well. That man was to eat from that tree also. However, then why did he say originally not to eat? Right now, this is a temporary prohibition, because there's a certain order that things have to be done. First, you're to eat from the Eitz HaChaim, and only after you eat from the Eitz HaChaim do you go ahead and then eat from the Eitz Hadas. Once you eat in that order, even the Eitz Hadas eventually will become permitted to you. Okay? But we couldn't wait. We couldn't do it in that order. We wanted das, right? The Yetzer Hara, human being, God created us many different types of Yetzer Haras, of tendencies. We have a Yetzer Hara for food. We have a Yetzer Hara for covet. We have a lot of different types of Yetzer Haras. But it's interesting enough, one of our Yetzer Haras is to know things. Maybe that's why we're so thrilled about Lashon Hara, why we spend money buying newspapers, We want to be involved. We want to know what's going on. We want to have understanding here. And maybe, and this was the first sin of Adam. He had a lot of questions. He's created a mature adult. Where did he come from? Why was he put into this Gan Eden? What are the instructions that are supposed to be? What is the meaning of life? Why did God create this? Why am this whole world for just me and my wife? There are a lot of things we want to know. These are burning questions that we still have questions. And if we were created, and it makes sense that we should be created, and you look at an organized world, someone must have created, then of course, then biggest question, then who created God? How did God get here? Now that's really a question that I would love to be answered. And that would solve a lot of my issues in life about the meaning of life. So we had this unbelievable desire for das. We couldn't wait to eat from the Eitz HaChaim first. And what we're saying is that there's something that has to come before das. And that is absolute emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To realize that there is a creator in the world, and that creator is a kind, benevolent creator who is concerned about my well-being, and everything that he tells me, there is a reason behind it, even if I don't understand that reason. Emunah must precede das. After you have that emunah, and you know what the halachas are like, right? You know what the halachas are. You know what God wants from you. Then you can try and get some understanding of it. And that's exactly what we said at Har Sinai. At Har Sinai, Chazal tell us that we undid the transgression of Adam and Chava. We said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will listen to your laws. We believe in you 100%. We will do it, even if we don't understand it. And then slowly but surely, we'll try to understand, because obviously, if we understand something, it's much easier to do the mitzvah than totally be bewildered by it. But it doesn't really matter whether you understand it or not. We're going to do it. And in fact, this is even what happened, I think, even with the chait of the Egel. It's interesting, and we quoted this pasuk in recent weeks. I don't remember, it was last week, the week before, that at the end of Yisro, there's an interesting pasuk. This is again way before Kabbalas HaTorah. I mean, I'm sorry, not before, way before the Chet HaEgel. It says as follows: V'yomer Hashem al Moshe Kosamar al Bnei Yisrael. Atem Risem Kimin Hashemaim Dibarti Yechem. Again, in Parshat Kitisa we have Kabbalas HaTorah. You saw that I spoke to you, right? That I exist, that I spoke to you. Lo tasun iti Elohei kesav v'Elohei zahav. Lo tasu lachem. God is, for some reason, repeating one of the Aseret HaDibros. And it's interesting, did God know what was going on? Do not make a God of gold or a God of silver. Why pick that out of everything he said to repeat? It could be the same way that after in Gan Eden, God gave him a specific command what not to do, and he told him exactly what not to do because he knew that is a good chance he would violate that. So to over here, God's warning. I'm warning now before the law, the laws of the Mishkan and everything else gone. Right after just to do was, I'm telling you, remember this law. Don't do it. Mizbach Adamata Sali, right? Pasuk is you want to come in contact with me. You want, you don't need an intermediary. You can make yourself a mizbeach at this point in time, and you have direct dialing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the way you should do it. And that's the only way I'm going to allow you at this point in time, until maybe the Beis HaMikdash will be built in Yerushalayim. That is the way you communicate with me and you connect with me, not through any other of your self-made intermediaries. That you shouldn't do. So we repeat, this is your test. This is your test. And yet, what does Klal Yisrael do when Moshe doesn't come back? So they say, right, this is again, Shmos Perek Lamed Beis, the beginning of Perek Lamed Beis. When they approach Aaron, where they say, V'yar ha'am ki Moshe l'retim in the heart, the people saw that Moshe was delayed. V'yikal ha'am al Aaron, v'yomri lav kumase lanu Elohim, make for us a God. Sheyachu l'fanenu ki zeh Moshe ha'ish asher lanu mi'eretz Yisrael lo yadanu mahayalo. We don't know. We want to know. We want to know what's going on. Eitz Hadas. The same thing going on here. They want the desire for das. And there's no question that just like the Eitz Hadas was a test for humanity in Gan Eden, what happened with the Egel was a test made up by Kadosh Baruch Hu. It didn't happen why do I know that? Now, we know that the Pasuk of Yisrael, Kiboshis Moshe, it's a famous chazal that we all know, that's mentioned that, that Moshe, when he left, he told them he'll be back in 40 days, and he was late a couple hours. They didn't know about Jewish time, kind of rare. What do you mean? But if you look back in the story, when Moshe goes up and leaves Klal Yisrael, there's no mention whatsoever that he tells them, I'm going to be back in 40 days. I'll be gone for a long time. All it says, I'm going up. And it's not the first time he's gone up. He went up several times pre-Matan Torah. And if anything happens in the meantime, Aaron and Hur is the address where you take your issues. That's it. As far as Bnei Yisrael knew, just like the previous trips up the mountain were all no more than a day, a day, 2 days, very short trips. That's exactly what's going to be Moshe Rabbeinu. He doesn't come back that night, doesn't come back the next day, doesn't come back in a week, he doesn't come back in 40 days. Now, this is more than just being a couple hours late. Imagine when you depended on Moshe Rabbeinu for so long, and 40 days he doesn't come back. And when he went up, he didn't take food to drink. Again, to me, that's not the biggest problem, because you have to remember the Jews in the Midbar also didn't have food and drink. This was man fell from heaven. There's no reason to believe that man, wasn't provided for Moshe Rabbeinu up, and even though later on, the only way we know that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't eat for 40 days, because later on he himself says lechem lo achalti mayim lo shatiti for 40 days and 40 nights. But again, the very fact that he didn't take food when he went up with him indicates that he thought he'd only be up there for a short amount of time. And the Chazal always talk about the scary conditions there, the darkness, the thunder, the clouds, the fire. Why did God do all that? Make them frightened? Because this was a test. The same way God tested them when they left Egypt with a lack of water and a lack of food and a physical test, this was their spiritual test. Okay, you saw me, you know that I exist. You see that I'm still giving you bread and water. I'm still with you. Are you going to get afraid? Are you going to, because what's going to happen in history where, you don't see God so clearly? Are you going to be able to handle that? And the Jews failed. We failed the test. Now, at that point, they couldn't turn the clock back. What was done was done. But God gives them a mitzvah, a paraduma, because paraduma is the way back to atone for the sin. Right? As mentioned, has many illogical laws. It's true. But what's the most, I don't say the most illogical thing, but the biggest unknown? For people who want to know, other Mauritian wanted to know about how he got there. He wanted to know things that preceded his birth. Today, right? Well, we have even a bigger unknown. We're concerned, and this is what Adam added to our lack of knowledge. Not only do we not know what preceded our birth, we don't know what happens to us when we die. Other than the sin of Chava, they brought death into the world. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how we're going to die. It's probably one of the biggest fears, and that we have. If we would known where we're going to die, we could live life differently and make preparations differently, and we also don't know what happens to us after we die. Nowhere in the Torah does it say anything. Unknown. Is there life after life or not? Are we on this world to work, and create points so to be able to enjoy an afterlife which is far greater than what we have now, or is our existence on earth the be all and end all of our existence, and there is no life after death? We're dead. And this is probably the two major theological issues that take place. But what is the meaning of life? So that the hate of the Eitz Hadas just increased the unknown, right? So that not only do we not know what happened before we created, we also don't know what happens after a death. And therefore, what the Torah is telling us is that the paraduma that deals with death and the tuma related to death, zo chukat ha-Torah. It's not an independent chok. It's telling us that basically the entire Torah has to be looked at as a chok. Not only the laws that are illogical, but even the mishpatim. We have to accept them as is without trying to look for reasons. In fact, it's interesting, the two mitzvahs in the Torah where God actually gives a reason behind it. The mitzvah is dealing with a king. King's not allowed to have, for example, not allowed to have a lot of wives. Why? Too many wives to take your mind off of important matters of state and learning. And the wisest king of all, we talked about for Shlomo Melech. Now that I know the reason, that's not gonna be a problem with me. He had many wives, and what happened? He failed that one as well. There's no reasons given in the Torah. We have to accept the Torah without question, without answers, to have complete emunah v'kodesh baruch hu zot chukas ha-Torah. And then, and only then, once we come to that conclusion, then we're encouraged to find reasons. What do you call it? There's many sperm that we have that deal with trying to find tamei ha-mitzvot, but these are only. This may or may not be the reason. Who knows? And it may, even if it is the right reason, it might only be partial reason. We don't have full knowledge of what goes on, but it's irrelevant. We have to get back to Nasiv and Nishma. We have to look at the entire Torah is that we do it because we know it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We know that God's got our best interests involved. And if I don't understand it, it's my problem. I'm sure there is a good reason behind it. In fact, if you go back now, let's maybe go back to the story of David ben Netina. So in the story of David ben Netina, in Mara, we know we've already talked about this before, that when the Jews pre-Matan Torah, when they were at Mara, they were given a number of laws. And there's Rashi in different places says what exactly laws were given. But in one text, it says that they were given both the laws of Kibbud Av and the laws of Paraduma. Okay? Why? It seems that these two laws represent opposites of one another. While Paraduma is the most illogical law that we have, not because of some of the symbolisms, but because, again, we didn't discuss many of the things that Rashi deals with, Tumah V'Tara issues, and that don't make any sense. But Kibbud Av is the most logical. the most logical. In fact, that will explain why that the Gemara in Kedushin mentions that an example from a non-Jew, because even non-Jews understand that your parents, who basically bring you into this world, are responsible for your existence, who supported you, who fed you, who drove you to soccer practice, who paid for your college tuition, who still worry about you, no matter how old you're going to be. There's a time when they get older, a payback. That not even before they get older, they should be the payback. But it's logical. Even a non-Jew, it's any human being should understand. In fact, somebody said "Dama benatina," the Dama is the words of Adam. Every human being understands that's right. That benatina, that you were a child who got presents from there was a giving parent. That's time to pay back. It's the most logical thing. And what the Gemara is there telling you is not something complimentary about them. Yeah, it's complimentary. A non-Jew understands that he's willing to sacrifice for a cause that he believes in and that he understands. Kibbud Av V'Em, he would be willing to give up money and not to disturb his father. He understands that. But the end of the story was that the Jews were willing to pay even more money for a mitzvah which is totally illogical, for paraduma. That is something that the average non-Jew will know. That's only something, Na'aseh v'nishma is only something that the Jews will do. And that's not something that the Goyim will do. But that is the way we have to approach mitzvahs, and that's what we failed at the Chet HaEgel. We went from Na'aseh v'nishma to wanting to know what was going on. Where in the world was Moshe Rabbeinu? Who was going to deal with? We want questions answered. We couldn't tolerate the fact to have total faith in Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that Moshe was gone. So then, conclusion. Remember, we start off with two questions. Why? One of the questions: why do we read the Parshas Parah pre-Pesach? My theory is that Pesach is the first holiday that responds to a situation that we felt was totally illogical. Right? One of the biggest theological questions that the Jews had when they were in Egypt is, why are all these things happening to us? Not only that our personal freedoms were taken away from us, as if that would have been, as Esther said, if we had been sold as slaves, I wouldn't bother you, Achashverosh. But more than that, babies viciously killed, thrown into the Nile and eaten by crocodiles, and terrible, terrible things that the Egyptians. Why? We're the chosen people. We're B'nai Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I mean, we may not be perfect and we have certain flaws, but we're so much better than the people who are persecuting us. Why in the world should I thank God, Pesach, for getting me out of Egypt when God put me in there in the first place, and there are thousands and thousands of Jews that never got their way out of Egypt? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So basically, it's a difficult question. You're right. That is a question that we have to deal with. But we have to come with the Na'aseh v'nishma. In fact, it's interesting that I think I've quoted this before, that on the night of Seder, we read Arami Ovid Avi, which is from Devarim. Now, we have to have a belief that while we may not understand events as they unfold, the Jews in Egypt didn't know what was going on, but looking back from Devarim, when after seeing Kriyas Yamsuf and the 10 plagues and Matan Torah and Mun for 40 years and the Bear Miriam, and they're about to come into Eretz Yisrael, we have to look back and say, you know what? God had a plan. And while I didn't understand at the time, and maybe even now there's still things I don't understand, I have complete faith that Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what he's doing and everything happens for a reason. Emunah comes before Das. That is an important message when we enter into Pesach, number one. And number two, what connection does it have, right, with the Chet HaEgel that we talked about before? Another connection is the idea is that Judaism stands in total contradiction to Avodah Zarah, and that we don't believe in a paganistic culture, and that we're here to just utilize the physical world and partake of every physical pleasure. In fact, if you know at the end of Zos HaBracha, it's interesting, here in Eretz Yisrael, we're concerned, people pay a lot of money to people who live in the States pay a lot of money to come and be buried in Eretz Yisrael. We want to be buried in a Makom Kodosh, want to be buried next to somebody who has yichus, maybe we want to be buried in a family plot. And yet where in the world is Moshe Rabbeinu buried? Torah tells us we don't know exactly where it is, but we are given a lot. Mul Beit Peor. He's opposite a place of a church of Baal Peor, a place of Avodah Zarah. That's where the great Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. So it may not be giving me a geographical location. It's telling me that Torah's Moshe stands in total contradiction to the values that Peor has. And what was Peor? Interesting. Peor had an interesting way of serving Peor. Because I'll tell us that you defecated in front of the idol. Very moving ceremony. And we're thinking, I remember when I first read it, so primitive man. How could they think that was religious? So disgusting. And what's sort of beautiful shot? No, it's not primitive at all. It's basically 21st century, Western culture. Because basically, what is the halacha saying? The halacha is saying is that Peor said there is nothing that we do that we have to be embarrassed about. As long as you don't harm anybody else, you can do in privacy of your home. You can do whatever you want to do, and don't feel ashamed. Whatever goes, for you have freedom to no restraints, no expectations. That's what Peor. That's what paganism. That's what Avodah Zarah stands for. Moshe and Torah's Moshe stand in total contradiction. There is a God, there is a plan, there is a purpose, right? There is an afterlife, and your job in the world is to become the best person that you can be and make this world a better place. And the reality is that all lives matter. Shabbat Shalom Kulam.